The first scream didn't come from a child. It came from the scout, Ravaz. And it was cut short by a sickening wet sound that echoed through the dense, dark forest. Before the others could react, something massive ripped through the underbrush. The darkness wasn't just thick, it was alive. Then came the second scream, and this time it was a child. A burst of green-blue bioluminescence flashed through the treetops as a flarebug exploded mid-flight. An emergency signal designed to briefly illuminate the terrain. But all it did was show them the horror. Tall, elongated creatures with no eyes, gaping sonic maws, and clawed limbs folded backward like broken marionettes. Shadow-Stalkers, native predators of Zar 4, and they had found the camp. The shelter, nothing more than a web of polymer tents strung around hollowed tree roots, erupted in panic. Families ran blind, stumbling over roots and each other. The air stank of adrenaline and hot breath, and the ground shuddered beneath the creature's charge. Someone fired a plasma flare that fizzled uselessly in the damp air. Another tried shouting orders, but the words drowned in chaos. Then from the center of it all, a calm voice rose, not loud, not commanding, but precise. "Follow the light, stay behind me." She wasn't wearing armor. She wasn't holding a weapon. Her long coat shimmered faintly in the dark, and her skin glowed with veins of soft, bioluminescent light, alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. Her eyes burned pale teal. Selene Arden didn't look like a soldier. She looked like the night had chosen her. Two children clung to each other beside a toppled crate. One of the stalkers turned its grotesque head toward them, jaws pulsing in rapid echolocation clicks. It began to move smooth, silent. Selene stepped between them. She raised one hand. The light pulsed brighter. There was no explosion, no concussive wave, but the creature screamed, a sound like a hive of locusts amplified through bone, and recoiled violently. Crashing sideways into a tree, the bark hissed as it absorbed impact. The children stared at her in shock. "Move," Selene said, not to them, but to the air itself. Bioluminescent spores erupted from her coat, drifting forward and forming a glowing trail. The children followed, and so did the others, anyone still alive and conscious enough to see the light. Selene didn't run. She walked quickly, leading them deeper into the forest, toward something she had prepared but hoped never to use. Behind them, the stalkers regrouped. They didn't give chase immediately. These weren't beasts of rage. They were hunters of patience. But they were confused. Her light had disrupted their sonar. That wouldn't last. Selene's hand pressed against a twisted mass of roots at the base of an ancient tree, one whose bark shimmered faintly with bioelectric charge. The entrance, sealed by woven foliage, opened silently. Inside was a hollow chamber of smooth wood and living light. It wasn't natural. She had crafted it over months using bioresonance techniques, encouraging the tree's growth pattern, cultivating symbiotic fungi, and tuning it with her own light-emitting biofield. It was her last resort. She ushered the survivors inside. The youngest whimpered, the eldest cursed under his breath. Selene stood at the threshold, watching the forest. Behind her, someone spoke, voice shaking. "What are they? Why didn't they attack you?" She didn't turn. "Because I don't hide, I adapt." Another flicker of motion. One of the stalkers leapt from the canopy, straight for the entrance. Selene didn't flinch. Her left hand snapped up. A flash of concentrated light exploded from her palm, not like a grenade, but like a nerve, sharp, pulsating, and targeted. The creature screamed and twisted midair, crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Selene turned and entered the chamber, the foliage resealed behind her. Inside, the space pulsed with slow, living light, warm, rhythmic. The spores in the air responded to her presence, weaving faint lines of motion. The children gathered around her. One, a girl no older than 7, touched the edge of Selene's coat. Your skin, it glows, Selene knelt. So can yours. Eventually, outside, the forest was silent again. But it wasn't peace. It was the stillness of eyes watching from every angle. The stalkers had retreated into the dark, sensing that the hunt had changed. They were learning. Selene sat in the center of the shelter, eyes closed, adjusting her internal pulse. Her body ached, light took energy, but the trap was set. If the stalkers entered now, they'd trigger the resonance field, a burst of bioluminal chaos tuned to their echolocation. Designed not to kill but to blind, to buy time. She listened to the breath of the people around her. Fast, shaky, some cried silently. One whispered a prayer to a god that never reached this moon. Selene whispered something too, not a prayer, just a truth. Darkness is not the enemy. It's how we stand in it that matters. And then she opened her eyes, burning teal in the stillness. The night was far from over, but so was she. The shelter glowed with a strange warmth. Bioluminescent veins ran through the walls of the living chamber, tracing faint pulses like the soft beat of a heart. The children slept in clusters, curled into each other like fallen leaves beneath a canopy of light. Most of the adults were still silent, stunned. Fear still hung thick, even in temporary safety. Selene sat cross-legged near the entrance, her back against the gently humming bark. She hadn't slept. Her eyes remained half open, alert to shifts in the vibration of the air. She wasn't just listening. She was sensing, her skin tuned to frequencies most people couldn't feel. Her fingertips rested lightly against the floor. The tree was calm. The fungi were undisturbed. The spores she had seeded into the roots still whispered harmony. For now, the stalkers lingered at the edge of the forest, uncertain. A child stirred, the youngest, a girl with ash-blonde curls and wide, questioning eyes, tiptoed through the dim light and sat beside Selene. "Are you not scared?" the girl asked, voice barely more than a breath. Selene didn't answer with words. She lifted her hand and pressed it against the bark. A soft ripple of light flowed outward from her palm, the glow responding to her biofield, pulsing once, twice, then settling into a rhythm. The heartbeat of the tree matched hers, or perhaps it was the other way around. The child watched, mesmerized. "Does it know you?" she whispered. Selene finally spoke. "It remembers." A long pause. "Remembers what?" "Pain, and the hands that did not come to burn it." The girl didn't understand, but nodded anyway. She leaned her head against Selene's arm and closed her eyes. Selene didn't move, but in her mind the stillness was only surface tension. Beneath it, memory boiled. 5 years ago, the research outpost on Zar 4 was new, shiny, and arrogant. A symbol of expansion, of science claiming dominion over the wild. Selene Arden had been the youngest biosensor specialist on the team, brilliant, but always too quiet. Too obsessed with things that didn't matter to her peers. Fungal empathy patterns, spore harmonics, xenobiotic mimicry. But she had seen something others didn't. Not just life, intelligence expressed through bioluminescent rhythm and subsonic pulses. The creatures here weren't just acting on instinct. They were coordinating, adapting in ways beyond primitive evolution. When her brother Jalen, a lead scout, was mauled to death during a night patrol, the officials blamed it on unexpected predator behavior. Case closed, but Selene had found his recorder. She listened to the last 10 minutes of his life over and over. The shifts in tone, the movement of air, the light frequency bursts from the plants around him. She mapped them out, obsessed, and the more she listened, the more she became convinced. Something tried to warn him before the attack. Something within the ecosystem had reacted to the threat. She took her theory to the council. She called it symbiotic bioempathy, interspecies harmonic cognition. They laughed. She was expelled a week later for theoretical misconduct and emotional instability. Her grants were revoked, her name erased from research credits. But she didn't leave the moon. She went deeper. For 3 years, Selene lived alone in the dead fringe of Zar 4, surviving among the dark blooming trees and whispering ferns. She altered her own biology, introducing controlled fungal strains into her skin, embedding resonant crystal fibers beneath the epidermis, aligning her internal rhythms with the local spore networks. It nearly killed her, but eventually she stopped being other to the forest. And the forest began to respond. Now she opened her eyes again. The girl had fallen asleep. Selene stood slowly, moving through the chamber. Her light dimmed instinctively to avoid waking anyone. At the far edge, the entrance curved like a closed eyelid. Beyond it was the forest, miles of black silence stretching endlessly. She pressed her hand near the seam and concentrated. Her skin glowed faintly. After a few seconds, the bark shifted, and a tiny spore thread uncoiled from beneath the root. She touched it with her fingertip, allowing her resonance to merge. What came back wasn't language. It was sensation asterisk. Vibration, pressure, repetition. The forest was being pinged asterisk, low-level sound waves synchronized, overlapping. The stalkers weren't retreating. They were calling for more. She inhaled slowly. They were building a convergence, something she hadn't witnessed before. If the signals reached a certain density, the pack could enter a hunting trance, moving as one mind. No light field she had created would stop them then. She turned, her pulse steady, but her eyes clouded with thought. She could still leave. She had a map of the underground thermal veins. If she left now, while the pack was still reorganizing, she could disappear into the northern caves for weeks. But the shelter would fall, the children would die screaming in the dark, and the people would never understand asterisk why the lights failed. Selene stared at the wall of the chamber, the way it pulsed softly in time with her own body. Her body, her choice. She walked to the center of the chamber and lowered herself onto the root platform. Around her, people stirred, sensing her motion. A few sat up, watching her without speaking. She didn't say she was staying, she simply didn't leave. Tomorrow, she would start setting new traps, adjusted to the shifted sonic resonance. Tomorrow, she would draw from her own light to seed emergency spores. Tomorrow she would fight, but tonight she simply sat. And the forest sat with her, not silent, not alone. The night began to shift again. Selene felt it in the spores before she saw anything, tiny fluctuations in their drift. Pattern, minute chemical shifts. The shelter's resonance was no longer perfectly synchronized with the forest. Something was asterisk off. Something was moving. A moment later, panic broke through the chamber in the form of a terrified voice. "Lena's gone, she's not here." Selene stood instantly. The girl, the one who had asked her about fear, had slipped away. No one knew when. The chamber stirred into frantic motion, but Selene was already at the entrance, pressing her hand to the root seal. A pulse confirmed her worst suspicion. A thin trail of destabilized spores had been left behind, moving outward. Lena had wandered past the safe zone. "Don't open it," someone cried. "You'll bring them in." Selene turned slightly. "If I wait, she won't come back." "I will." She stepped into the dark, the forest swallowed her. Zar 4 was not silent. Even in deep shadow, the trees sighed and flexed, fungal blooms exhaled faint chemical clouds. And creatures hissed and slithered in the underbrush. But Selene didn't flinch. She was tuned to the spore line, able to follow even the weakest bioluminescent trail. Especially the faint, wandering pattern of a child's disrupted heartbeat in the fungus field. Her own light was dimmer than usual. She could feel the drain, too much output in too short a time. Her internal biofield had yet to recover. Still, she pressed forward, one careful step at a time. letting her palm hover just above the mossy floor, where the spores reacted in soft glimmers to her presence. Then she saw it, a cluster of spore flowers bent in a specific direction, a breeze or a presence. She turned slowly. The Shadow-Stalker was already watching her. It stood maybe 10 meters away, half masked by a tree, its body unnaturally still. No eyes, no mouth in the conventional sense, just a curved, membranous dish where its face should have been twitching. Pulsing, clicking, the echolocation was starting. Seleni's breath caught. It wasn't attacking yet. It was listening, trying to map her shape, density, position through sonar feedback. And it was asterisk broadcasting dissonant sound waves meant to overwhelm neural pathways, make the brain misfire, freeze, panic. Already Seleni's vision blurred, her knees buckled slightly. No focus. She shifted her light, not brighter but more precise. She tuned her biofield to the feedback loop the creature was using, oscillating her internal rhythm against its pulse. Matching, then flipping it at the edge. The moment the frequencies aligned, she surged the light outward in a short, staccato burst. The creature recoiled violently, its echodish convulsed, emitting a screech of confused static before it slammed backward into a fungus-covered root, disoriented. It didn't die, but it wouldn't follow. Selene collapsed to one knee, gasping. Her hands trembled. She was burning out. I'm too slow. Too drained, a rustle ahead. Lena, she whispered hoarsely. The child appeared from behind a curtain of bioluminescent fronds, eyes wide with fear but alive. Selene forced herself upright. Come. Together they moved slowly back toward the shelter, every step a whisper. Every breath calculated. The moment they entered the chamber, Selene felt it. Something was wrong. The glow traps, carefully tuned spore pods along the entranceway, were dark. Dead, she looked around sharply. Her field emitters had been severed. The resonance web was broken. Panic surged through her. Who touched the traps? Silence. Then a voice gravelly hostile. You shouldn't have brought that thing here. It was Jaren, one of the older settlers, a former miner. He stepped forward, holding a piece of broken filament in one hand. Those lights of yours, they bring asterisk them. Don't pretend you don't know. Selene stood between him and the children. The traps were the only thing keeping them out. Jaren sneered. That's what you asterisk say asterisk, but you glow like them. You talk to the trees. You weren't here before they started hunting asterisk us asterisk. Selene's fists clenched. You sabotaged our defenses, she said slowly, because of superstition. Because I'm not an idiot, Jaren shouted. You think we don't see it, you called asterisk them. You're some kind of witch, several others stirred. Fear was contagious, easy. Selene's glowing veins didn't help her case. She exhaled, then crouched and touched the chamber floor. A faint hum began to return as she forced her biofield back into the roots. You want me gone, she said without looking up. Fine. I'll leave, but the resonance web goes with me, and you'll last maybe an hour without it. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Then someone else spoke. It was the girl's mother. She brought my child back. No one else moved. That single sentence shifted the room. Jaren growled something under his breath, but backed away. Selene stood. Her light was flickering now, weak but present. This forest doesn't respond to fear, she said to the group. It responds to patterns. You break them, you die. No one interrupted her this time. Later that night, Selene worked in silence, repairing what she could of the spore field. She placed new pods grown from her own reserves. Her hands trembled. She hadn't fully recovered from the earlier pulse, and she wasn't sure she ever would. But she didn't stop, because the stalkers weren't done. And neither was she. Even if the people didn't trust her, yet they were still asterisk alive. And that meant she still had work to do. The third night came without stars. But Selene felt its weight in her bones long before it began. The spores had grown silent, not dormant, silent. An unnatural stillness, like an intake of breath before a scream. The resonance threads she'd rewoven through the shelter had begun to flutter erratically, like nerves twitching in anticipation. The trees weren't warning her this time, they were waiting. Selene stood outside the main shelter, watching the dark with eyes that glowed faintly, flickering like a flame running low on oxygen. Her fingertips brushed the nearest fungal stalk, trying to tune in, but the feedback she received was strange. The familiar rhythm of the stalkers was out of phase. They had changed. Behind her, someone stepped into the clearing. A heavy tread, hesitant, it was Jaren. He didn't speak right away. His eyes didn't meet hers, but his voice, when it came, was lower. Rougher. I was wrong. Selene didn't move. I'm aware. I saw what you did to that one. You could have left the girl. You didn't. Selene nodded once. They're not hunting individuals anymore. They're sinking, becoming something else. Jaren swallowed. What does that mean? It means the traps won't work tonight. They've learned their signatures. A tremor rippled through the ground, barely perceptible but unmistakable. Selene's pupils narrowed. They're here. The first howl rose not from a throat, but from the air itself. A cascading screech that rolled like sound dragged through broken glass. Every fungal bloom within 100 meters curled in response. The trees recoiled. Spores lit briefly, then died. The forest dimmed. The shelter erupted in panic. Selene ran back inside, cutting through the chaos. Masks on, she shouted. Sound dampeners in. Now. The older settlers scrambled to follow, pulling makeshift gear into place. The children huddled in corners. One of them, Lena, ran to Selene and tugged her sleeve. If you do it again, she said, eyes wide, will it make them go away? Selene knelt. It might, Lena bit her lip. If you do, I'll learn. I'll be like you. Selene looked into the girl's face. So young, so aware. Then she rose and turned to the group. Their signals are harmonized now, she said aloud. They're thinking as one. That's why we're still alive. They want to test us. Learn what we'll do. A pause, but I can break that link. Temporarily. How? Someone asked. Selene hesitated. My body can produce an opposite resonance, an antiphase to their echo field. If I tune it right, I can overload their sensory network. Blind them, disrupt their cohesion. Silence. Then, what happens to you? Selene looked toward the door. If I push too far, the feedback could rupture my ocular cortex. Burn out my optic nerves. You'll go blind. I'll stop seeing them. Maybe that's not a loss. No one spoke for a moment. Then Jaren stepped forward. Let us help. What do you need? Selene turned. Her voice softened. I need space, I need quiet, and I need you to trust me. She walked alone into the center of the camp, the last open clearing between the trees, where fungal light still barely shimmered beneath the canopy. The night pressed in on all sides, not shadows, movements within them. Dozens of Shadow-Stalkers, surrounding the camp like sentient silence. Selene closed her eyes. She tuned inward. For months, she had learned to resonate with the forest. Tonight, she would resonate against it. Her fingers flexed. Her breath slowed. Her heartbeat dropped into a controlled rhythm. From her core, a low hum began to rise, not audible, not seen, but felt. Her veins lit faintly. Her skin began to glow a pale, cool blue. She adjusted the phase. The stalkers twitched in unison. They felt it. They began to move fast, low, slinking into the clearing with lethal precision. One let out a fractured screech, a challenge. Selene dropped to her knees, palms to the ground. She pushed. Her light exploded, not in fire, not in heat, but in pure frequency. A wave of blue bioluminescence surged outward in concentric rings, pulsing with anti-echo energy. It passed through trees, spores, flesh. Everything vibrated with it. The air shimmered, the stalkers convulsed, their echidiscs spasmed. Their movements became erratic. They turned on each other, clawing, screeching, retreating in disarray. One stumbled into a tree and collapsed. Another fled headlong into the dark, blind and howling. Inside the shelter, people shielded their eyes, but no pain came. Just light steady, calm. The pulse began to fade. Selene collapsed forward, gasping. Her eyes remained open, but saw nothing. The attack was over in 5 minutes. No one spoke at first. Then they emerged, slowly from the shelter, blinking at the glow that lingered on the trees. Spores drifted gently, curious. The clearing held its breath. Lena was the first to reach her. She knelt beside Selene, touched her hand. "Can you see?" Selene blinked slowly. "Not in the way I did before." "But you still shine," the girl whispered. Selene smiled. Around her the people gathered. No one called her a witch. No one told her to leave. They didn't need to. She had already given them light. And now it was theirs to carry. The world was still glowing, but for Selene it had changed forever. Her eyes remained open, still shimmering with that soft, bioluminescent blue, but they no longer saw. At least not in the way others did. Light had once been her language, her way of navigating and decoding the world. Now it was a soundless blur, like echoes through a fog she could no longer part. She didn't cry. There was no room for regret, only a strange, quiet clarity. Pain hadn't taken her sight, choice had, and somehow that made all the difference. In the days that followed, no more stalkers returned. Whatever remained of the pack had scattered, destabilized by the disruption she had created. The resonance field she'd unleashed had done more than blind. It had fragmented their unity, forcing them back into solitary instinct. Selene suspected they would re-emerge, eventually, in a different form. Nature never left a wound untouched, but for now, Zar 4 had gone still. Inside the shelter, something else began to shift. People no longer whispered about her in fear. They came to her instead, with questions, with curiosity, with a cautious kind of wonder. They brought her tools to touch, materials to manipulate, and asked her to teach. The spores that once responded only to Selene's presence now flickered faintly at the approach of others, as if her field had begun to tune the entire camp. Jaren helped reassemble the light traps, not with suspicion now, but with commitment. "I still don't understand half of what you're doing," he muttered one morning, "but I've seen what happens when we ignore it." Selene laughed gently. "That's how most good science begins." The children were quicker to learn, Lena especially. She followed Selene's movements like a shadow, asking questions, mimicking the slow hand gestures that tuned the spores, even adjusting her breathing to match the rhythm of the mycelial pulses. Selene couldn't see her, but she could feel her. The light in Lena was growing, and not just in her veins. Selene sat each night near the heart of the shelter, cross-legged on the warm root floor, letting her fingers rest on the soil. She couldn't track the patterns visually anymore, but she had learned to listen. Not with ears, through skin, through resonance. The fungal network vibrated with the footfalls of those who walked gently. She could trace movements, sense warmth, feel when someone approached with hesitation or joy. She didn't miss the faces. What she felt was enough. One evening, as the spores flickered around her and laughter rose softly from the edge of the camp, she realized something. She was at peace. For the first time since the night her brother died, since the academy silenced her, since her research had been labeled madness, she wasn't surviving. She was living. The message came on the 6th day. A low chime echoed from the old satellite uplink, nestled deep within the roots of the central tree, equipment no one had touched since arrival. Someone called for Selene. She followed the vibration of their footsteps to the console, knelt beside it and placed her hand on the pad. The voice crackled through, crisp despite the distance. "This is Director Reese of the Central Bioresearch Command. We are receiving anomalous field signals from your quadrant. Specifically, synchronized bioluminescent pulses at a scale previously unrecorded in any known system. Preliminary data suggests a biologically encoded frequency modulation radiating from your location. We request a full report and immediate transfer of the field generator. Pause, and if possible, the source individual responsible for emission." A long silence followed. Selene didn't respond immediately. She stood slowly. The others in the shelter had gathered. They said nothing, but she felt them. All around her, a soft web of light flickered to life. Not from her, but from the spores attuned to every voice, every breath, every living body in the shelter. She placed her hand over the transmitter. "No transfer," she said simply. The line crackled. "Repeat. No transfer," she said again. Her voice calm, final. "The source has no interest in returning to be studied." "Ms. Arden," the voice pressed, "this signal has the potential to alter the entire understanding of xenobiotic interaction." "It already has," she interrupted, a moment of static. Then silence. She turned away. That night she returned to her place at the center of the shelter. Lena sat beside her. "What was the signal?" the girl asked. Selene tilted her head. "Just an echo from the old world. Curious, always watching, still hoping to measure what it doesn't want to understand." "Are they coming here?" "No. Why not?" Selene reached out and touched the root beneath them. It vibrated softly, steady and familiar. "Because this place doesn't answer to labs or machines. It responds to care asterisk, and care can't be shipped in crates or published in journals." Lena was quiet, then softly, "Will you teach me more tomorrow?" Selene smiled. "I already am." She leaned back, letting the warmth of the soil seep into her spine, letting the silent chorus of light dance unseen around her. She could not see their faces, but she felt every flicker of hope in their movements, every pulse of wonder in their breath, and in that radiant silence she knew she had not lost her light. She had passed it on. Selene Arden never carried a weapon. She never fired a shot. She never led a charge. Her hands didn't pull triggers, they tuned spores. Her eyes, before they dimmed, never saw enemies, only patterns. And in a world that had long since decided survival meant domination, she chose something else. Connection. Others called it strange, unnatural, dangerous. They labeled her ability a mutation, her intuition a liability, her empathy a risk to mission protocols. But it was that same empathy that saved them, not through force, not through fear, but through resonance. What Selene did on Zar 4 was not a victory in the traditional sense. There were no medals awarded, no military brass arriving to shake her hand. The data she generated never made it into the official archives of the Bioresearch Command. Most of what happened in that forest was either erased or filed under unverified anomalies. But those who lived, those she led through the darkness, remembered. They remembered how she had walked into the clearing alone, blind to everything but her own courage. How she had listened when others screamed. How she had stayed when escape was still an option. And most of all, they remembered how she never treated the unknown as the enemy . Selene never needed to control the forest. She simply chose to stand with it when everyone else ran. In the weeks after the attack, the people of the shelter didn't rebuild in the old way. They didn't fortify. They didn't dig trenches or hang barbed wire. Instead, they followed Selene's teachings. They learned the rhythms of the mycelium fields. They tuned their shelters to resonate with the pulse of the trees. They used light not as a weapon, but as language. Where once there had been fear, now there was fluency. Where there had been silence, now there was harmony. Selene did not lead them. She guided them, not by commanding, but by remembering. Every lesson she had learned from the forest, from pain, from solitude, she gave freely. Not in lectures, but in movements, in gestures, in the soft hums of resonance that the children slowly learned to echo. Her own sight never returned fully. She saw blurs, shapes, pulses of color in the edges of her perception. But she no longer depended on vision. Instead, she learned to feel people in their resonance, the subtle patterns in their presence, the tiny variances in the way they affected the forest. And in those differences, she discovered something deeper than seeing. She discovered understanding. Every night, Selene sat alone for 1 hour recording. Not with a console, with light. She placed her fingers into the roots of the elder tree and sent pulses of coded resonance into the soil, an ancient form of memory storage borrowed from the ecosystem itself. Every lesson became a wave, every warning a rhythm. Every message, a flicker of intent woven into the land's living archive. It would outlive her. That was the point. She knew the world beyond Zar 4 hadn't changed. Somewhere out there, men still built weapons to silence what they feared. Still wrote research papers that reduced wonder to data. Still mapped alien planets only to erase what made them alien. But she also knew, somewhere, someday, a child might stumble upon a strange signal from deep within the roots of a glowing forest. A pattern, a pulse, a guide, and that child might not see it as a threat. They might see it as a question, and if they asked the right one, they wouldn't be alone anymore. Selene never said she was right. She never claimed to have answers. But she chose and her choice mattered, not because it saved everyone, but because it showed what being human could mean, when stripped of fear, of pride, of the need to conquer. Because being human was never about controlling the unknown. It was about choosing to stand with it when everyone else runs. She left one final message, recorded into a fungal strand, encoded in bursts of pale blue. It wasn't for any government, any scientist, or any military. It was for anyone who still believed survival didn't have to come at the cost of compassion. It said, if you're human, don't ask how to destroy what you don't understand. Ask if, when darkness closes in, you still know how to shine without blinding what you fear. And with that she closed her eyes, not to rest, but to listen, because even now, long after the chaos had passed, Zar 4 was still whispering, still singing, still remembering, and so was she.